So, on today's episode, I wanted to talk about a series that is very popular and very well known. But the reason I wanted to talk about it is that I've recently finished it. I finished it a couple months ago, this trilogy, and so I felt it was good to talk about it while it was still fresh on my mind. And that is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book, Mistborn: The Final Empire. If you were trying to find this, you can easily just search Mistborn, and this will generally pop up. This is the first book in a trilogy. I will say, though, even if you just want to read this book alone, you could do so and have a complete story and walk away feeling very comfortable with what you've read. But overall, I would recommend reading the entire trilogy, obviously, as it completes the full character arc of the people in this story. So it starts with Mistborn: The Final Empire. It moves on to book 2, which is the Well of Ascension. And then the third book in what is called Era 1, and that is the Hero of Ages. And Era 1, you're asking? Well, what Era 1 means is that when Brandon Sanderson created this world, he decided to actually have different series go on at different points in time. So for instance, this one feels kind of like a Victorian era, kind of medieval era fantasy with the technology and capabilities of that time period. And so this trilogy is a complete story of characters in that time period, and so it is dubbed Era 1. Era 2 is now complete, and that is Wild West era, but with these same powers. So these characters are done and their story is told, and now it has moved on to a new set of characters with these same powers, but they've evolved over generations, which is really fascinating. I haven't read Era 2 yet personally. I've only read Era 1, so I will only speak on that. Eventually, he plans to do Era 3, which will be almost like 1980s as far as aesthetics for those books. But we'll dive into just this one. So these books, like I said, these 3 are a complete series, and you can just read them and be totally fine. If I wasn't so enamored with the world he's built, I could just walk away, but I absolutely love what he's built here. Now, what are these books specifically about? These are about Vin. She's the cover protagonist here. She is a young girl who's a street urchin who ends up being kicked around from thieving crew to thieving crew, and she is what's known as a ska, and her people are sort of the held down, subjugated class in this world that is run by a man named the Lord Ruler. He's the Dark Lord of this world, and he has held it down with an iron fist for centuries, and he has ran it very specifically a certain way for reasons that we're not really familiar with. Many people just assume it's that he's simply evil, and the story goes that the Lord Ruler defeated the fated hero, the Hero of Ages, and took the power for himself and subjugated the world to his rule. And what ends up happening is Vin has capabilities within herself. They call it allomancy. And essentially what happens is people can ingest different metals, and that gives them different powers. They can manifest in pushing or pulling away metal. They can manifest in strength or speed, different capabilities of detection or playing with people's emotions. It's really a fascinating system. And what's cool about it is that Brandon Sanderson has a very specific and deliberate way of delivering this system to the reader. It doesn't feel like any magic is unearned. It doesn't feel that anything that these characters are capable of is out of left field or just a MacGuffin or simply a means of progressing the plot forward. Every aspect of power and capability these characters have feels deserved, and that is very difficult to pull off in such a sweeping epic. I will say that for a lot of people that get interested in fantasy, this is the book I recommend. I recommend it more than almost anything, and there's 2 specific reasons. One is the type of prose that Brandon uses. He talks about what's known as Orwellian prose, where they're basically a writing style that is meant to be more specific, less flowery. It gets to the point, it has brevity, but context. It feels like it has a strong literary power, but it doesn't overpower you with too many words or elaborate sentences. It really gets to the point in a way that's exciting and engages you at a deeper level at the same time. It's really special. It's very hard to pull off, especially for this type of material, but he does it expertly. The other reason is that if you are a fan of Harry Potter or have read Harry Potter books, which, gosh, just about everyone has, these books will feel familiar because the setting almost feels like an alternate world Harry Potter in a way, in that the Lord Ruler kind of has some kind of Voldemort-y vibes, and that's in some ways by design. When he created these books, he said he wanted to blend two types of fiction together. He wanted to blend a heist story, because he loves heist stories, with the idea of a Dark Lord winning the battle against the fated hero, because he jokingly said that the Dark Lords of these worlds never catch a break. They always get kind of hosed by these little kids who just defeat him at the last minute with, their MacGuffin powers, which is kind of funny to think about, but he put those two pieces together. As far as how they manifest in the story, I will say that the heist aspect, I don't think is fully realized. I think it more leans into the fantasy and Dark Lord aspect and the magic of the world, but I think the series is better for it. I think if he had leaned too heavily into that heist aspect, he would have had to narrow down some of the scope, as many people, when they think of heist stories, think of things like Ocean's 11, obviously. Even a recent movie, a kid's movie like The Bad Guys, is a heist story, and we think of it sometimes on a more narrow scope, rather than the grand scope that happens in here. Now, as far as the type of heist, what ends up happening is Vin, our main protagonist, she has the power of allomancy. She has the ability to ingest metals and gain different powers, and most people can only ingest and utilize one metal. Vin has the capability to use them all, which is what makes her a Mistborn. And so she is discovered by a thieving crew led by Kelsier, who is also another Mistborn, and he's very charismatic and an incredible teacher. And he teaches her how to utilize her powers in exchange for her helping their crew, which their plan is to overthrow the Lord Ruler and steal his most valuable metal supply, which is called atium. And that is the overall plot of this specific book. It is about Vin's journey trying to survive in this thieving crew and help them overthrow the Lord Ruler. And it is a very exciting read, and the way that this edition specifically, I would recommend it if you're willing to go hardback. It's really cool because there's a lot of little touches that he added. For instance, he has these little quotes before every chapter that are from different characters, different journals, or like history books. It's kind of a calling card to Brandon Sanderson's work now, but this was a really cool thing that he did. Also, he has the little symbols for the metals on the chapters, which is really cool. And in the back of this edition, there's actually a breakdown of all the different slang terms for the characters and their powers. I will argue, though, that the actual way he immerses the reader in the powers is very well done, and it's not difficult. It's very easy to dive in. He immerses you slowly, and the slang terms actually help you help you understand what these characters and their power sets really are. Versus feeling like you're just throwing it over your head. Here's another amazing illustration that is a map of the Final Empire itself, which is really cool. And then there's actually a bigger breakdown of Luthadel, which is the specific city that this takes place in. This edition really has all the bells and whistles, and each different book adds additional back matter content, which is really fun. An interesting thing as far as editions for this book, when he first released it, he actually had a different cover, and it was kind of rushed and put together at the last minute. At least this is from the research that I've gathered. And even though the illustrator has done some incredible work, the cover itself just was kind of a mess. I'll try and find it. It's actually pretty hard to find even online, but I'll try and find it and place it here. But it was the original cover, and it was kind of a mess, and it didn't really grab readers. And even though his first book, Elantris, had really done quite well, his second book was doing pretty poorly, and he and his agent attributed this is something he said in an interview, to the cover. He felt that the cover needed to be redone. They needed a reskin on the book, and they had to fight very hard to get it, as publishers are very leery to do a recover. And so they kind of negotiated to get some additional content in the book in exchange for recovering it. And I'll put the additional covers in this video as well, so you can see how much better the covers really got, some of the paperback covers. But I will say that this hardback cover is the best version, and the actual book itself behind the dust jacket looks really clean and creates a very epic vibe. So if you're someone who's a shelf junkie and loves having like the coolest version of a book on the shelf, if you can find these hardback ones, I would recommend it. It shouldn't be too difficult, as these are the main hardback versions at the moment with the actual, illustrations on them versus, the ones that had almost more of a movie poster look to them. And I'll show you this one here. They all have different colors for the leather and the spine there. And I'll show you the second book as well to give you an idea of what all of these look like. It really is awesome. This is the last one here, the Well of Ascension, which has the spine and the leather. Again, these, in my opinion, are the best editions of these books if you're someone who likes to display a bunch of junk on your shelves. That's just me. But in conclusion, if you'd like to read a single standalone story of a fantasy heist that has a very wide and epic scope with a very deep world that is very easily introduced to the reader and is very easily accessible, you can start here. If you want to dive deeper into this world, you can read the trilogy. And I will say that the climax of The Hero of Ages is one of the best book climaxes and book endings of a series that I've ever read. I mean, the actual conclusion of this story gives every character the ending they've earned. It actually has a bit of a twist to it that I never expected, even after a major twist that occurs in the second book. The third book had an ending I never saw coming. And the way that it ends this journey of these characters feels very special. You really feel like you've traveled and lived this journey with them. And that's something that Brandon Sanderson felt is important in fantasy, as he talked about the Lord of the Rings, and really it's about the journey of Sam and Frodo and their, trek across the world. And he tried to bring that type of vibe into these books. And I think he's done it better than almost anyone I've read. I've become a huge fan of his work by reading these books. This isn't the first of his books I've read, but I will say that as far as a standalone trilogy, it's fascinating and it's very hard to put down. My wife also was reading these along with me and she found them extremely engaging. They're very easy to get into, and the audiobooks, if you are interested in that, are also incredible, and they're read by Michael Kramer, who is one of the best audiobook narrators, one of the best voices in audio content out there. So with all that being said, if this sounds like a book that you're interested in reading, you want a fantasy heist with a deep world and a rich lore that is very accessible, I would recommend Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson off of my shelf.